Morning, everybody, for our Friday Live today on 21st of May. For everyone who's joining us live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, but also anyone who's listening afterwards to the recording and to our podcast now, which is on Spotify through Anchor. So I'm starting a couple of minutes early this morning because we've been getting into a good chat, and it sounds like we just need to share this. We've got a wonderful guest here this morning, Jackie Finley, who is Chair of Sussex CIPD and also an interim HRD with her own consultancy. Jackie, welcome. It's so lovely to see you.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for coming to join me and Ant to have an unscripted conversation. I think some people don't quite know what to expect, but yeah, we've been doing this for a good few weeks now, really just sharing what's going on for us, for our clients, for our friends, our partners this week. So trying to keep it really current, and then really thinking about how we're humanizing work in everything that's going on, because there is so much happening. How are you doing this morning, Ant?
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's we were just having an amazing chat, and we have started a bit early. So, Jackie, really good to meet you. I haven't spoken to you before, but we've just had 10-15 minutes of just talking all things. Wonderful. So it's good to meet you. Good to. I can't believe it's Friday already. Where's that come from?
So this week's been quite a long week, hasn't it? And there's a lot happening. And so we were just starting to touch on that with Jackie, which is really around this sense of there's so much happening and people are trying so very hard with a lot of positive intent to do as much as they can, but there's layers of complexity and change that mean that we have so much more work to do than maybe we anticipate, or maybe we're prepared to do, or maybe we're capable of in the hours we have in the day. And how, when we're up against it, what are the things that are slipping in terms of us keeping work human? Jackie, do you want to explore that a bit more in terms of what we were talking about with keeping things really human when we're busy and pressurized?
I think that's a really interesting one, because flipping it slightly, I think I know my senior leadership team far better because we're working from home. So you see the dogs, the cats, the young kids, and you have to take that step back and say, okay, we need to draw breath and think about the people in the context of that. And that's been a real eye-opener. I think that what happens when we're really pressurized, we go into shorthand. And because we're then virtual, that shorthand sometimes slips. So because you're not in the office together, you're not sitting face to face. That's the thing. And the other thing I find is that emails are really dangerous. I'll admit, I had to put out an email to all staff and just say, mind your language, because what we were finding was people were under pressure, and it wasn't inappropriate language, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it was just a little bit not as courteous as they would. And because we're a global company, being courteous because of cultural differences is quite important. So I'll just throw that into the mix, because that was a really interesting experience of having to say to people, I'm picking up that people are just being a bit kind of abrupt.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think, and I recognise that in myself as well, I sometimes assume people know what I mean or the intention. And it depends almost for me what mode I'm in. So like when I get into my head, right, okay, I've got a jam-packed day, back-to-back meetings, I'm going to get it all done today. If I start the day like that, I can go into that mode of just get it done. And it's a way of me focusing, but then also blocking out some of the things that normally distract me into, quite protracted conversations or difficult pieces. And actually, that's the bit that we need to maintain, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a really interesting. So radical candor obviously isn't a new topic of conversation, but it's really interesting, isn't it? The real fine line between being radically candid and being able to just say what you would say as if someone was your best friend. You know, you don't worry about what you text to your best friend because they're your best friend. And even if it's abrupt, they'll take positive intent in it. But in the workplace, it's different. You know, you've got different, then they're not your best friends. There's different cultures. There's different people in different scenarios. There's many different ways of perceiving email, as we know anyway. But now we've got Slack and Teams and all these other different platforms that people are unsure of. You've almost got to really double down on the positive intent, and so that's the receiving end, but also positive intent up front and actually taking the time, because it's going to land potentially not the way you intended it, and you've got to be really conscious. It's a real fine line, isn't it?
The number of times I've written an email, I've received something and I've written that email and then I've parked it and I thought, I really shouldn't be sending this. But it was a reaction to what I'd received, and I thought, am I receiving this in the way it was intended, or do I just need to park that email, just pick up the, dial in on Teams, talk to the person, and then we'll solve it, rather than that, email ping pong match, as I call it. And it's really difficult. We've brought some new people in. We've been lucky to recruit during the pandemic, and that's been a real struggle. We've been very, very lucky, really great people, but onboarding them and keeping them with us and making them feel as if they are part of the company, I think that's been a real challenge working remotely.
Yeah.
Have you found it? So we're going through that at the moment. I was just thinking, Alex. So we're growing. We're hiring new people, and we're about to go through probably a couple of months of onboarding and getting people together. And we've already gone through a few months of doing that with new people for this year. Have you found any particular ways that are working? What are you finding with the companies that you're working with and across the board?
Well, what we tend to do is when we work remotely, or when we are working remotely, most of the senior leadership team every day are having meetings with their teams. They don't miss it. It's like, I'm checking in with you. It's not just about what work you've got on. It's I'm checking in with you to make sure you're okay, and just keeping that discussion. It doesn't take long. It's half an hour. With my team, it's a half an hour call straight after the senior leadership team meeting. So we have a kind of agenda every day. The meetings are there. So there's an operational meeting that I'll be in at 9 o'clock, and there's senior leadership team meeting at 10:30, and then I'll have my team meeting straight after. It sounds as if I'm always in meetings, but those meetings are actually the communication channel within the company. So operationally, what we know, what's going on around the world, day to day, in a 72-hour window. Senior leadership team meeting, what's going on across all of us as a senior leadership team. And then we go down into our own departmental meetings to convey what we've been hearing throughout. So it just keeps people in touch. It allows us to check in with their mental health, their physical health, what's going on. If they, I would say we're quite flexible, and we don't clock watch in terms of, as long as the work gets done, fine. If people need to nip out to the shops, go for a walk with their youngest, whatever, fine. As long as it gets done. And if they can't get it done, then they put their hands up. And it's quite a big change, I think, for companies to go through when they've had people around them, and that presenteeism, to break that. And I would say 2 years ago, the company I'm currently in would have been that kind of company. It's a real cultural shift. I don't know if you found the same, but I don't think it's, you can onboard somebody in a week or a month. It might even take 6 months for them to really embed into an organisation.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think it takes a lot longer than everyone expects. Exactly as Sally is saying, you know, communication is very, very important.
Yeah.
And so those meetings, absolutely. You know, if I'm not having meetings with people, then I do feel isolated. I do feel like, hang on, I don't really know what's going on around here, even though I'm seeing emails flying back and forth, team chats. It's not the detail, it's not the connection that you need. But I do think there's a big variance in size of company and types of company and industry as well, though, because as we know, there's some companies that have done remarkably well in the last year and some that have struggled continuously and continue to do so. So there's still some on that survival line that are you know, the need to get things done is so intense that actually the time is very, very pressurized. So whilst, yes, obviously some of those more comfortable companies, more successful companies are able to offer their people a lot more flexibility, there are some that are still, you know, up against it, probably not got as many people as they need to do all the work that needs to be done. And making some really tough decisions about where they prioritize the plan even for the business. And I think that variance needs to be considered, because certainly what I see in the media is there's an awful lot about what big companies are doing. And there seems to be an absence around, actually, there's a huge amount of small and medium-sized enterprises in this country as well as abroad. And sorry, not abroad, but around the world. But in terms of being able to recognize that it's not the same. It really isn't the same. If you've got a team of 15 people who can all support each other, that's very different than actually if you've got individual contributors that you're relying on for particular pieces that are critical to the business success. And I think there's that understanding, that nuance that's lost a bit. And I think that must be really, really hard, because there's also that balance. So when I'm thinking about that, you know, it's a lot of those larger organizations struggle to get the kind of the purpose and meaning in their work that some of those smaller organizations do. So there's kind of like, as an individual, certainly if I was on the job market, I'm not, but if I was on the job market, I would be really considering, you know, do I want to go to a large organization that's going to offer me, you know, pretty much the best benefits and flexibility, but I probably won't have as much influence over the purpose, the meaning, the impact of the work? Or do I go to a smaller organization that's probably more challenged in terms of where they sit in the market and may not be able to offer the same amount of flexibility, but gives me that hit of purpose and feel like I'm actually having an impact? So that's a real tension, I think.
I think that's a really interesting point, and it's something I've reflected on. The company I'm currently the HRD of has 138 people, so it's not big, it's not massive. It's growing, thank goodness, but it went through a really, really torrid time just before the pandemic hit. I thought it was going to close. In fact, had taken everyone through a redundancy consultation, and everyone was on notice, and we turned it around in the pandemic. So it was a lot of opportunity, etc. And you're absolutely right. It's a lot easier in a company of that size to keep your communications going, even though we're global. So, you know, we've instigated, the CEO does a monthly update live with everyone. We do lunch and learns, so we've just reintroduced that. So we get anyone at any level to talk about what they do in a global meet, and that is a constant onboarding. So updating everyone monthly with different people coming and talking. I think it's not necessarily thinking outside the box, but I take on board. I'll be honest, I have worked for very large organisations as an executive, and I felt that I didn't know the company. I knew the mission and I knew all the strategies and loved all that high level stuff. But, you know, watching and see it get into the operations and seeing the impact, you know, you're too far removed sometimes to see actually what happens on the ground. And so for me, I consciously now know that I know what kind of organisational size I'm comfortable in and where I can be most effective. And, you know, I wouldn't say that came overnight. That's taken a long time to explore and feel happy with. and comfortable with. And yeah, you're right. Sometimes you're not going to get the big bucks and the benefits, etc. But your job satisfaction, I would say, for me, is far, far greater and far more satisfying.
Yeah.
What I like what you just said, Jackie, is this element, and as you said, it's taken time and time and experience after experience and year after year to go through it. So that's an interesting point in itself. But the whole great resignation and people really thinking now about where they want to be, or maybe just making a change for change's sake and going, I just need to learn something different and be part of something different and a new challenge or new experience, because I'm actually a little bit uncertain about where I do thrive and where I do fit in. And I thought it was this, but maybe it's something different. There's a lot of that I'm hearing at the moment. Really,
I think this pandemic has made people just rethink what's important to them. And I think that, just reflecting, what do I want to be doing? Is it really satisfying? Am I prepared to do this? I think, we've all got to earn a living, don't get me wrong, and I really feel for people that have been furloughed. I feel that have lost their jobs. There have been some industries very hard hit. But also it's an opportunity to say, am I going to go back to what I was doing? Or am I going to take this opportunity and say, maybe this is the chance, maybe this is the opportunity for me to think. But that's a very brave thing to do, I think, given our economic circumstances at the moment, which are still incredibly uncertain.
Yeah. That's really struck me, actually, is how uncertain things are right now. Is that there's this sense of relief of restrictions lifting, of people potentially being able to travel soon, and feeling like things are coming back. But I certainly, as a CEO running a business, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, anything could change tomorrow. Anything could change tomorrow. So there isn't any security. Certainly not in the same way that we felt before, I think, not that there ever is, but it's almost like that realization that there isn't any security, that it is a changeable scenario on such a regular basis. And things can drastically change, not just, small changes, but we need to be almost on it all the time and ready for what's next. And it does feel, certainly with the last year, the amount of challenges that people have come up against, it's felt like a barrage. It's continuous, and trying to keep going and keep yourself motivated, especially if you're helping with family and friends as well who are having an even tougher time. You feel like you're the one that's like leading the charge and saying, right, come on, we can get through this, it's okay, let's have hope, let's look into the next bit. But that can get tiring, can't it? Certainly I know as a mum, the amount of times I've said to the kids, oh, don't worry, we'll be able to go and do this soon, or do this soon. And I've almost stopped saying that now. I've almost got to the point where I'm like, okay, we're here, what are we having for dinner? And kind of focus on the short term, because it feels like that's more in my control, that's more in my influence than some of those bigger dreams, I think, that were keeping us all going.
I had a conversation with a good friend of mine going through quite a tough time, and she said, Jackie, I can't think further than the day. I have to live the day. And that's as far as I can think ahead. And it really brought me up short, as I was discussing with you about something else. To be in that situation where you've been bombarded with either family bereavements, or your parents are at an age where they need caring support, or your kids are, having difficulties at school, and that relentless pressure. And you get to that point where mentally you could only think about the day you're in. You cannot think about tomorrow. And I think that, coupled with the constant ambiguity, for some people is such a stretch for them, because they're used to structure. Their whole demeanor wants that structure, and we're not going to have it. It's not there at the moment. And I really feel for those people in terms of their own mental health. And it's that's something that I've seen people at all levels where their mental health has really been stretched. People that I thought were very strong, very stable, very with it together. And to be honest, that we've had to put some support in. I mean, we've done mental health awareness, we've done mental health first aiders, we've done peer-to-peer support, all sorts of things. But it really came as a shock to me that at all levels, and I mean at all levels in the organisation, some people have, you know, you think you're all right one day, as you just said, Alex, and then you hit that brick wall.
Yeah.
Have you found, Jackie, because it's really interesting, you're right, and I'm finding people, actually a number of clients this week and previous weeks have gone, my head's full, literally those words. And therefore it's kind of echoing what you're saying about, I just can't see what's in front of my face. I just need to get through the day. And then have you found that's impacting on decisions at board level, at kind of your HRD level? How are you finding that impacting? Okay, well, like sometimes you need to look a little bit further ahead to make a decision that, okay, you know, it's going to hurt you in the short term, but actually it's going to free up some time and some space and to release that pressure over the longer term. Otherwise, we're going to be sat in the same position in 3 months, 6 months time. How are you finding that kind of conversation at that level?
Absolutely. If I said to you, at the moment, I think I've got about 3 budget scenarios going on for the people plan. There's the current one, there's the one we'd like, and there's a kind of one in the middle. And I'm juggling all 3 all the time. And you know, you think that you're going to do one thing, and then the scenario changes, and you're doing something else. And it's that agile mentality. What we struggle with. And I would say this about the whole of SLT, and we know we're struggling with it, is to keep taking that step back. So apart from the normal daily meetings, we do kind of take that time. I'm not going to say we're all successful because of the ambiguity. You can't say what happened in the past is going to happen in the future. You can't do a trend line and say this is it, because nobody at the moment, you know, I pick up bits in the marketplace and try and marry them together, and so do my colleagues. But if you cannot stand on shifting sand at the moment, you're not going to survive. That's how I describe it to people. You've literally got to feel as if you're on that wobble board all the time, and being able to flit from, right, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. Now that, to try and communicate that to the staff in order to give them some form of leadership, when maybe you, the leader, don't actually have all the information.
I found that, I've got to say, I found that really, really hard in the summer. And I wanted so much to give everyone certainty and hope and security, but you can't. And when you're really responsible for a lot of impact on people's lives, it's so hard to not let that take over. And it does for all leaders. I know it does. When you're in a business owning situation as well, it kind of compounds things. And I think there is that piece around, coming back to what you said before, Jackie, communication and authentic communication. There were several days, certainly last year, where I just said to everybody, like, I'm doing all I can to keep us all okay. Now, whatever that means, like, that might mean that there's inconsistencies. That might mean that sometimes I don't make the right decisions. But my intent is continuously to do this and to make sure that we are going to be okay through this. And I think even though, like, everyone was quite happy to hear that and it helped reassure, it's short-lived, because actually the next week, you know, another thing happens. People need to hear it again and again and again, because actually it's happening to us all the time. And as you said, that kind of standing on quicksand moment, it reminds me of a point someone said to me about resilience, which is a topic I talk about a lot in terms of well-being. But, you know, what is resilience? And someone said to me, resilience is being able to remain open in a challenge. And I thought that was really interesting, because actually it is true. When a challenge hits you, you go into do mode again, don't you? It's like, right, what do I need to do? What decision do I need to make? How do I need to get everyone through this? But actually being able to remain open in a challenge and say, okay, this is the scenario. Let's explore. Let's be curious. Let's not make judgment. Let's accept what's happening, has been more helpful, actually. And I see that it's not those people that are unaffected by challenge. It's not the people with greatest levels of resilience that are getting through this. It's the people who are determined to just keep going regardless, regardless of how much things affect them, regardless of what's going on around them. It's just to keep going, because I think it's enough to stop anyone in their tracks. And we're seeing that with the data, particularly with working mums, with the homeschooling piece and the additional responsibility. I know it's all working parents. There's a lot of dads out there that have done absolutely the same. But the impact on mothers is coming through in data in terms of what's actually happening, and people are burning out and choosing out of work. I'm done. Can't do it anymore. Loved my job, great career, but I'm done. And that's happening, and that's so sad. It's just so sad. I find that terrible, Jackie.
There was some really interesting. Oh, sorry, go on, Jackie.
No, I was going to say there's 2 points I pick up on. One, the long-term consequences of that, about working mothers and young people. I think that's the first thing is, what are we faced with in terms of the economic situation of wanting those people to be in work, because we need them to be in work. I think the other thing I'd just reflect back to you, Alex, is I think you're absolutely right, is remaining open, exploring what options you've got and choosing the right option. And I think sometimes at the moment we go into solution mode rather than finding out what is best and exploring and bringing all people's intelligence to the solution and the options rather than thinking we know best. Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on those 2 points because I think they're really, really important.
And that's it, isn't it? And bringing more people in, asking everyone their thoughts. Just because you ask people what they think doesn't mean you have to act on everything they say. It's not a consensus. As a leader, you still have to take that information in and make decisions. And sometimes it's just helpful to get that direction from a leader that says, actually, I've considered that, and I'm still going to go ahead and do this piece. But I think it's really helpful that you've coloured in the picture so that we can see what's happening.
Yeah, that was a really interesting point, Jackie, and it breeds into the diversity and inclusion, right? You don't know what you maybe don't know because you haven't experienced it. Alex and I were talking about it last week. How would I make decisions accurately about things like maternity leave, paternity leave, and working from home when you've got children and that experience? If I don't bring people in when I'm making those decisions, I'm going to be making the wrong decision, not because I'm not trying to put people first, not because I'm not trying to be a human leader, but just because I haven't asked the right questions early enough and brought the right people in. I think that's, really
and that's
important.
it, yes. And Sally saying again, listening mode's never been more important. Sally, absolutely, that's everything we're talking about. And maybe it's time. I'm going to kind of try and wrap up here a little bit because we're coming to the end of our time here. But maybe it's time to break down our modes. We know that we go into a mode because it's less stress on our brain. So it's reduced cognitive ability if we're in a particular mode because we can keep going and it taxes us less. But if we were to break down those modes and allow ourselves some time, how much better would we be if we were able to deliver and listen? How much better would we be able to be if we were able to make decisions and remain open? How can we do that in a way that feels okay to us without stressing us out? That's a big conundrum. I'd love to be able to answer that, but it feels like that's what's needed. Is how do we get that ability to be able to remain flexible all the time when actually our brain is exhausted?
It's definitely easier, I think, when I switch my brain into learning mode. This is just a learning experience, but I'm really energized by learning. Like, that's a strength for me. I get energy from thinking like that, and I know that others don't. So I'd be really curious if you're listening to this and maybe that learning isn't a natural thing for you. I really want to hear how people do that, because for me, without it, I'm not sure what I'd do.
But people bring to that scenario learning sometimes a lot of bad experience that they've had, say, in school. I think what's really interesting is, and I'm reflecting on what you've just said there, Anne, because I think it's an important point, is what kind of perspective are you in? And I'm one of those. I keep saying to my colleagues, look, I'm not an expert in this, so can I ask an idiot question? I mean, they laugh at me now because I just ask them continuously, well, you know, is this ridiculous if I propose this? And, you know, trying to just explore options and test my knowledge of what they're trying to say and gain understanding. But I think it's a challenge for people, for some people who may have had some really not good experiences about or feel that people are really challenging them in terms of their knowledge and expertise sometimes. So going to close down, so I think that's a really, really interesting point that I'm going to take away from this discussion and reflect on that. Think about that a bit more.
Thank you. And there's so much in this, isn't there? We could talk for ages. I feel like, because for me, learning is about growth, and growth is about being like, you know, a living thing. So, you know, I think people certainly now of what I see in the education sector, you know, there's a much better approach to getting people excited about learning. So hopefully we'll see new generations bringing that energy through into a learning and curious space, especially with the, you know, the plethora of information that we have available at our fingertips to actually get the learning we want as well. And how do we guide people to do that in a human way that's actually, you know, supporting the longevity of the human race and the planet and looking after this wonderful world that we live in. So there's quite a bit there, isn't there? But certainly for me, as I said, as we kind of close up now, I'll be thinking about lots of the things we've said today throughout the day. I'll be thinking about trying to not slip into a particular mode. I'll be thinking about being curious and open and exploring what people are really saying and listening to them in depth. I'll be thinking about how I can approach challenges that I know are going to hit me today, and I've already started pinging into my inbox this morning while we're talking, thinking I'm going to remain open in these challenges, because actually it's, for me, certainly it's the ability to just keep going when those challenges hit, because there's so many of them at the moment that actually if we let things knock us over, where are we going to be? We've got to keep going. And so for me, and I'll be a bit I guess cheesy on this, but for me, you know, having a chat with you guys this morning and connecting and really feeling actually just so energized, and it's so nice to see you, Jackie. Seriously, I haven't seen you for ages, and it makes me feel that's what makes me feel better about getting through things. So thank you. I've absolutely loved talking to you today, Jackie. I'm sure many people listening will value your insights, which are so valuable in all the different pieces of work that you're doing. So thank you for joining us today. And we're back again next Friday live, 8:30 in the morning GMT, on all our platforms, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, as well as recording for Spotify on our new podcast. And you can listen to all of these playback and share them with people as well. So thank you for all our listeners and viewers who've joined us. Thank you, Ant. I love having a chat with you every Friday. It sets me up well. And Jackie, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day today, and I hope we can all remain open to the challenges we're facing.
Thank you. I really enjoyed
Jackie.
this morning. Lovely to meet you, Ant, and lovely to see you, Alex, as always.
Oh, well, hopefully we'll see each other soon.